John Henry.
All right. Thanks, man.
Crush it, brother.
Appreciate you. What's up, y'all? How you doing? It's my first time doing a keynote in this fashion. Shout out to the Capital Factory. Marianne, I see you on there. Sam, Jorge. Shout out to the whole squad behind the scenes. Shout out Josh Bear, appreciate you. Just had breakfast with Nate Jones. He says what's up. Shout out also to Carly for being an incredible liaison and helping me get situated here in Austin. Albert for emceeing is not an easy role. And then Knives, I see you on the production. And shout out to all the viewers as well. We're gonna have a fantastic discussion. How long do I have? 15, 20? 25, okay, great. That helps me, I can be long-winded, so that helps me get a sense of how long I can run. So what we're going to have is a very contextualized conversation. Also, where should I be looking? Is the main camera right here? Oh, I see it, there. What's up, guys? So we're gonna have a very contextualized conversation around the reality of the market today. The reality is that the world as we know it obviously has fundamentally shifted in a number of ways, especially with regards to how different verticals of enterprise all today exist completely in a different norm than they did pre-COVID. But also just after, of course, the killing of George Floyd and the social unrest, I think that set off a domino effect that has felt to me fundamentally different than any of the diversity and inclusion types of efforts that we'd seen in the past. And I think that when the pendulum swings so far in a direction that gets the allocation of capital actually, which of course controls a lot of people who get into office, which of course controls a lot of board of directors, which of course impacts what technologies are made and products and so on. When the shift of capital meaningfully is reallocated in a way that this capital is now being put in the hands of emerging managers, is what it's called in institutional land, i.e. people, non-white, older males that have been, typically the sole allocators of capital. So when the pendulum shifts and we actually hit a critical mass point where money is now shifting, what does that mean for you, for your business, for your customers, for the ventures that you decide to create, for the projects that you're building? If you're a creator, if you're a musician, I've seen all kinds of things just using my plain eyes, observing now all different types of brands that weren't with it before. Now that it's hot and now that it's culturally acceptable and accepted in the zeitgeist to be a little bit more socially woke, all of a sudden we have faces that corporates wouldn't have dreamed of naming the face of their campaigns in a 2016 world. Now, today, are commanding more budget than ever. We're raising more capital than ever. As founders, as fund creators, the reality is that the market today is completely different. I just came from having breakfast with, just now, just like finishing up, coming and arriving here, with probably the premier venture capital fund in all of Silicon Valley, which of course means in the world. And I get chills thinking about it because the premise of the discussion was that people in our communities are not fully grasping just the extent of the power that we actually have. And now here's the thing. When you don't know that you have the power, it affects your confidence walking into a conversation where you're not understanding that you have more leverage than you have. And when you enter a conversation, like a straight up capitalist conversation, and you don't have the leverage, or at least you're not behaving in a way that you don't have the leverage, then it affects the psychology of the conversation and then the pattern recognition that exists in a lot of these environments where in reality, they're just looking for patterns that indicate to them that, these founders or creators are gonna be successful. And it's more than just the metrics, it's the intangibles. We're gonna unpack a lot of the intangibles that go into, these spaces where we can start to rebuild equity within our communities in meaningful ways. Now, let me take a step back because I realize I just came in here guns blazing. I have so many things going on, but let me just reset and establish context. I, much like many of you, grew up super humbly, Dominican parents, raised in the hood, Washington Heights. Shout out to Washington Heights, if anyone in here. Comment if anyone here is from Washington Heights. Actually, our MC's from Washington Heights. We just found out that we grew up a few blocks away from each other. And, you know, that's the beginning. But that's also the middle, that's the present, and that's the future in a lot of ways. A lot of what I've been fortunate to be a part of in terms of creating ventures and, you know, I express who I am in this world as an entrepreneur. I fucking love entrepreneurs. We're just like corporate rebels. You know, for me, the reason I was drawn to the entrepreneurship path is because it's someone who understood the capitalist framework, but I feel like entrepreneurs never compromise who they are as an individual. And I loved this idea of blending these two worlds, learning how to slip and slide through the matrix and navigate this corporate landscape while preserving the most individual form of who you are. And I learned early never to compromise who I is, pull up into every space like exactly how I am, and some of the things that I was ashamed of growing up, like for example, my parents never had careers, they had jobs. My mom used to sell super soakers in the park in New York City summers, and my pops was a presser at a dry cleaner and drove gypsy cabs and stuff like that. That today is the reason why I can speak to you face to face and you can feel that what I'm saying is true and I can resonate as a result of where it is that I come from. And so there's so many experiences that we go through as a community that when we step into this corporate world that historically has only made room for a very homogenous crowd, I've felt like in the last decade, especially in the last decade, as we've stepped up into these spaces, we've been made to feel like we have to compromise a little bit of who we are in the way that we speak, in the way that we dress, in the way that we show up to fit into this corporate environment. But I think that what I've learned is when you can lean into all that you've been through or come from, then you end up being in a uniquely well-equipped position to create music, art, projects, companies that speak to our community. By the way, a large percentage of the things that we consume as a community are made from people that don't come from our community. So, you know, there are brands that are created and acquired by private equity companies and spun up and spun out and then sold. And what I've been privy to over the last number of years, especially, so some of you all know my first business, you know, as a doorman was just hustling dry cleaning. That's the vehicle that I had to me at that time that was presented to me by a resident who lived where I worked. All I needed was but for one person that came from where I come from to let me know, what fucking excuse do you have? And it shook me to my core because up until that point, as a doorman, I'm watching people go in and out and I would say, yeah, but they went to school. See, I dropped out. So yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah, but you come from X zip code. Yeah, but you had your own room growing up. I never had my own room growing up. So I would literally like play these weird psychological games with myself as to why I could justify at face value why I couldn't be on the other side. Now, I'm saying that, I know a lot of y'all resonate. This is cultural, some of the cultural and psychological debt that we've accrued because what we're having to do, undo, is generations of trauma that's been passed down and a certain type of thinking that's been passed down. And now you have to calibrate that against the reality that we're in. We're in a reality today where media has been democratized, investing has been democratized, Art has been democratized. Currencies have been everything's democratized. So now what we have is a lopsided equation whereby we have access to just about anything. And so it really becomes a psychological stepping into the psychology that enables you to lean into that which you've come from and makes you. And that for me happened with, his name was Hugo. When Hugo shook me and was like, yo, what excuse you have? That started my journey. Now, a lot of you are on the very beginnings of your journey now. And a lot of you have a particular vehicle that you're learning to express yourself through. You may have a project, a small business, whatever it is that you're doing. What I learned is that my very first business, I placed so much pressure on that business because I'm reading TechCrunch and Forbes, and I'm seeing that, the media places, tech media, I have some bones to pick with tech media because they'll take the sliver of companies and trajectories that, raise and those companies and trajectories do exist, but they'll focus in on them. And then by virtue of their massive distribution power, they'll perpetuate those stories into the very feeds that we consume on the regular and make us believe that anything less than that is a failure. So what happens when you're assessing your reality of working on your business? And I know that a lot of you listening are like, fuck, that's right. Because I know that you guys tune in on the articles and then compare your progress against that of whom was covered. And I'm also hyper aware that now I've broken through and I'm on the other side and I'm being covered. And as I'm being covered and I'm seeing what's being written about me in real time, I'm realizing that in a way there's a disconnect between, because I feel like the way in which things are written and captured and disseminated is really not at all, it doesn't represent the full journey and doesn't encapsulate the full journey that one has had to walk to get there. So now, take it all the way back. You're in your first venture. You're learning to navigate. Cool. Don't place all of the weight of the expectations of that you want to do in the world. Don't place it all in that one venture, because then you'll suffocate that venture with the weight of your expectation. You will suffocate what you're working on today with the weight of your expectation, when in reality, you need to just let that thing be and let it teach you what it's meant to teach you. So to put some concrete context on that, my first venture, I learned, was purely meant to get me to develop my confidence in myself and to be able to knock on your fucking door and say, hey, how you doing? My name is John. Boom, door slam. Next one, next one, next one. That's a skill that I developed because of the nature of that first venture. And over the course of your career, wherever it is that you are in your career, you will go through different ventures that will go teaching you things. After that first venture, then I went and I created an incubator in Harlem. And the model was weird. We incubated startups. We didn't take any equity. We also didn't charge any money. And people were like, yo, how are you gonna make money? And I was like, don't worry about it, But in reality, I had no fucking clue. But it felt really good. It felt like that was a thing that I needed to be doing. And you're going to work on something that feels like it's what you should be doing, but has no, it might not make any rhyme or reason in the moment. And the pressure will exist for you to put that off to the side and instead do that which brings you more short-term rewards. That could be, and that looks like any number of things. For example, in running this non-for-profit, I ran it for 3-4 years. I was broke I was going through it. And I'm at odds with myself, like, yo, how much longer do I do this? Because I remember if you look up this 23-year-old is shaking up, venture or whatever on Fast Company, you'll see an article of me at 23 years old, like boss people around an office, and it was the coolest fucking thing ever. I was like the most recognition that I had gotten, but I was going through the hardest time I've ever been through at once. So how do you calibrate those realities against each other when you're on the precipice of blowing and you know it, but I couldn't figure out how to commercialize it in the short term. You will go through that. If you're walking a path less traveled, you will go through that. And I had every temptation in the world to say, yo, fuck this, I need to bail, time to sell e-courses, time to do all that other cheap shit that I know will cheapen my brand equity, but I need to cash in now. Well, if you can withstand the pressure, then I created this, in my head, I had this visual where I realized it's like a slingshot effect. It's like the more pressure you're able to withstand, then when you let go, it's directly reciprocal to how much distance you can cover. Because if you ain't take no pressure, you ain't going nowhere. If it's just something limp. But if you can withstand the pressure, then what it's doing from a market perspective is it's actually building your depth of perspective in something that's completely new. If you're doing something that's new and path less traveled, then you're building a one-of-one point of view in the marketplace that is specifically custom to your experience. And guess what? That doesn't have a lot of commercial application. And that will get you looked over for a lot of things. But when you finally do find a fit in the market that can acknowledge the value of that perspective, you will leapfrog anybody who decided to go with the more lower hanging fruit things for years. Being able to withstand the pressure long enough and be propelled forward is the equivalent of 10 years, maybe 15 years of doing boring ass shit that no one gives a fuck about. Those 3 years of building brand in this peculiar project where no one charged any money or made any, or just it was just a peculiar thing, built my depth of perspective that then presented me with the opportunity to go and cash in tangibly in a number of ways. For example, being asked to go host podcasts for Gimlet Media and WeWork and Samsung. And at the time I was like, well, why would you choose me? Because I'm 23 years old and I don't have that experience. And they said, well, you've done interesting shit. Interesting. And I've begun to step ever so slightly a little bit more into the power that my viewpoint can have, the commercialization opportunities, and the distinctness of the viewpoint. Millionaires are skeptical people. Decamillionaires also look for reasons why things can't work. Centimillionaires, you start thinking of possibility. Billionaires that became billionaires in one lifetime, from experience, are always rooted in optimism and why things can work, and they see the potential in people. And in actuality, the crazy thing from my own experience is that I felt I had more in common coming from growing up below the poverty line. I had more in common with a billionaire than I did with anybody in between. Really, in terms of the optimism that's required to come from where we come from to get to where we are is the same optimism that takes you all the way. And when we shook hands on that first deal, it was a transfer of power. And it was more than money. It was a psychology that is time. It's our time. And that, by the way, was before 2020. And I get chills thinking about it because it's even more true now. It's even more true. And, you know, what do we go and do with that? What do you go and do with that? And that can be answered in myriad ways. It depends on where you are in your journey. It depends on where you are in your acumen. It depends on where you are with your experience and your connection. Who the fuck knows? Only you can answer for yourself. But I will say, the question persists. What do you go and do with that? This opportunity and this window will compound in influence, but it'll never be as accessible as it is now because we're on the ground floor of it. For me, the way that I chose to, as I mentioned, like, I'm just a fucking diehard entrepreneur, and that's how I express my activism to the world. But that doesn't have to be how you express your activism. But for me, in seeing, you know, after the killing of George Floyd and seeing those civil unrests, I realized, like, wow, these systems will not passively change, ever. They will not passively change. They must be built, and even more onerous, they must be built by us, as inexperienced as we are today, as, you know, wet behind the ears. Like, it's our generation whom is uniquely well-equipped to marry the worlds, the confluence of worlds that we exist in today. Digitally native, culturally relevant, experienced enough, so we're old enough, we're young enough. There are so many factors that are aligning in this moment in time, today, August 19, 2021, that make us literally the perfect candidates to step up and do something big. And as I said earlier, it's the gradual evolution of all that which you'll go through that will make you uniquely well-equipped to go out and do exactly what you're going to do next. Maria, for example, Salamanca, who I think will speak in a moment, is at Unshackled VC, that uniquely well-equipped to be in that specific seat and invest in founders that are coming from immigrant backgrounds. Who else would have been able to do that shit? Who? She had to walk a very specific path that blended institutional acumen and learning how to navigate those spaces, but also with being a Latina, and merge those two worlds to create the specific thing that she's working on now. And now she's in a seat where she can redistribute the flow of allocation of capital and put it in the hands of people that are bold enough to step up and go take it. That capital will not find you unless you're bold enough to step up and go take it. Tony, whom will also speak in a moment, is also creating something uniquely specific to our community. He's bold enough to go build it. Someone's bold enough to step up in the seat and distribute capital. So the question persists. Markets are completely different. You have macro pressure from the top down, you know, with Netflix committing to bank $100 million in minority-owned banks. Cool. Well, whom are the minority-owned banks? The ones that have been set up, the legacy banks will stand to benefit, but it also leaves room for emerging banks. For example, even on the media side, there are tons of ways now where you can cash in, even at the micro-influencer level. You can catch a bag today for being a micro-influencer with enough presence in Austin, Texas. You can walk away with $2-3 grand a pop per post. Do that a few times a year, and my friends, you have just enabled yourself to slip and slide out of the matrix, leave your job on the side, and make a full-time hustle out of being a creator. Cool. You see what I'm saying? There are so many different ends, there are so many different slivers in the spectrum of the value chain that you can slot into based on where you are today in your journey. I happen to be in a spot now where I believe I have a unique skill set in social storytelling, in the ability to raise capital at scale, and in the fucking chops to go build something difficult. And so what we're doing at Loop is completely vertically integrating and creating a financial services that I learned the other day. It hit me. My business is not selling insurance. My business is restoring trust and equity that our community has in financial services. That's how I'm choosing to step up into today's brand new world. And I think the weight of the question sits with me. How will you go out there and step up and take the power of the context that we've been raised in, the cultural capital, and understand that we have the leverage, we have the pricing power, we have the consumer power, and we have the cultural capital to go out there and create brand new systems that nobody else can. That's my time. Thank you all. Cheers.